Well, hello again, pastors and church leaders in Iowa. Chris Mavity here, and I am so thrilled that I get to be next to Andy Addis. And we're going to talk a little bit about ministry, the heart of ministry, and the pastor role maybe, or whatever. I'm not sure exactly everything we're going to talk about, but
Let's just
number
go.
one, it's really good to see you again.
You too, brother. Last time we talked, we were having chips and salsa. Some of the best I've had in a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, in Iowa, you know. So you did a preaching workshop up there. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for doing that. And boy, I tell you, he's got some resources coming out even from that maybe you'll give a heads up to. But tell us what's going on with you, your ministry, and your family. Or you, your family, and ministry might even be better.
Well, we'll go in that order then.
Okay.
Yeah. For me personally, I'm kind of in a unique phase of ministry. I've celebrated 20 years at Crosspoint last November.
20 years.
So I've always believed that longevity leads to some good things, and they've led to some good things in our life. So, we came to a dying little neighborhood church 20 years ago, and now God's allowed us to pastor in that same place, same community, but reaching 14 other places, and being a church that supports other churches in our rural multi-site. So that's been good.
Okay. Can I ask you a question about, you said a dying neighborhood church. Mm-hmm. Will you describe that to me? Because that could be a lot of different things.
Right. You know? A dying church, it isn't because it's only got a few dollars or a few members left. It's about its trajectory. So when you chart out its growth or its decline, where can you tell that it's heading? And so for Westbrook Baptist Church, that's what Crosspoint was named before it was Crosspoint.
Okay.
Westbrook Baptist Church, planted August 23rd, 1970. Great associational church. When I was a kid, I used to go to associational youth events there. They were the big church.
Really? Oh,
yeah. In the 1990s, they had their heyday running about 400 people. But at the start of 2000, they lost pastoral leadership. Couldn't get a leader to come. They had a debt problem, and they had dwindled down to just a handful, about 100 people, if they were having a good Sunday. And even though 100 people, for some say that's a great church, it was a trajectory downward, and you could see the writing on the wall. They were in decline. So that's where we came in after seminary, and we were there. Okay.
The number one question in my mind when you say that is, how do you and your family follow God's leading to that?
Well, that's a great question. I was raised spiritually by some mentors who taught me that God calls you to a position, and very rarely does God call you to a location. Meaning, He called you to be a pastor, so go pastor. And wherever you want to pastor, do that, unless God specifically says, go here. Now, we had some indications that I could go through and give you some hyper spiritual moments where, it really felt like God was leading us there.
I get enough of that.
But what really it boiled down to was, it was 60 miles away from home. It was a place that we enjoyed. We were living in inner city Fort Worth, and my son was just about to get into the school system.
Okay.
And we decided we wanted to go home. We wanted to be back here. And my wife made an amazing statement. She said, if we do great church work and we save the whole world, but we don't impact our families. And this was going home.
Okay.
And so we made a decision that even though the church wasn't the best church that we had an opportunity to go to. It wasn't the wealthiest or the most promising, but it was a great place to serve. They were loving people, and we just really sensed that we could fulfill our calling there. As a matter of fact, it was great because there was some part of a challenge to it.
Oh, fantastic. Now, you're bringing up one of my favorite words to talk about with pastors.
What's that?
And that is calling. And specifically, being true to our calling, and that could mean a lot of different things, that makes us worthy to pursue our calling. And so talk to me just a little bit about a pastor call to ministry, and what it takes to be true or worthy of that calling.
Well,
this is going a different direction than why we're here to talk about
rural
great. Ministry, but hey, it might fit in.
I'll do whatever I can do for you here. First of all, the half of the calling. God is the one who gets to choose how He wants to tap you on the shoulder. And I'm called to be a preaching pastor. And I say it that way because I think preaching isn't always pastoring and pastoring isn't always preaching. I think you need to be able to do both, but you're kind of called primarily to one. And the joke early on in my ministry was, I'm a pretty good preacher, but as a pastor, if Andy visits you in the hospital, you're going to die. So I had to get better at that side of things.
If you're interviewing Andy, that's not an indication of death, is it? Is this
No,
okay?
no,
so I'm
you're
okay.
good.
All right, just double checking.
It became such a joke at the early days at Crosspoint. There was a senior lady who we were very fond of, and I went to visit her in the hospital. When she saw me, she said, "Get out." But I think God equips you, and part of your calling is in your preparation. You can look back and see, oh, this is, a trajectory that God has me on. So for me, in 8th grade, I'm an introvert, and I still am. If you do the MBTI, people think, oh, you're on stage, but I get my energy from books and headphones, right? Mm-hmm. I want to be pulled away. I'm not that natural extrovert. But in the 8th grade, I had a teacher who I got kicked out of gym class because I banged up my knee. The only class left was speech and debate, and I would have rather died than get in that class. And this teacher, Miss Sally O'Connor, she recognized that. And she loved on me. She actually introduced me to her husband, who was a disc jockey at a radio station. And so when I was 14, I was on the air. She was hand walking me through this class. And I can go back and see how God took somebody who thought that he was made for the opposite of this and started changing them and moving them in that direction, so that when he finally tapped me on the shoulder and said, here's what I want you to do, it made sense.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Andy, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is you've been such an encouragement to me in my life.
Same.
Through your ministry and being able to hear you in a couple of different contexts, not only on the preaching one, but others. And the encouragement that I get from you isn't necessarily attaboys, pats on the back, although, I mean, you can do that. Your fair share of that.
Yeah, but introverts aren't good at that either.
But it's in this idea of the manifestation of your calling. So talk to us a little bit, if you don't mind, about when it's hard to honor that calling as bringing glory to the Lord.
Yeah.
And when it's easy, you just mentioned 20 years. Hey, things maybe are a little easier today than they were as you described.
Well, yeah, and we call it seasons, right?
Okay,
that's the language that we like in the church. Say, well, we're going through a season. The problem with the season is it's like Narnia, the winter that never ends. We have no idea when this is going to be over. So we do go through seasons, and I can look back and see that there's been development and hardship. But think biblically about how the church grew. The church always grew when it was under pressure and duress. That's when it got strong. The diaspora, Galatians 4, isn't it, where it says that in the fullness of time Christ had come, and that fullness of time there was finally a road system. There was one language. There was Hellenism. There was Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, because they dominated everything. It was the perfect environment for when you squash the church, it just spread everywhere. And it was in that painful moment that the development of the early church took place. And I think in our calling, as hard as it is, it's going through the struggle that develops the strength. It's enduring the hard times and seeing that we're doing this not because it's enjoyable. We're answering this call not because it's fun, but because we are grateful for what we've been called to and the one who has called us to do it.
Okay, so I know numbers are important. I mean, there's a book of the Bible called Numbers.
Sure.
Sure. Numbers aren't the only thing. As it relates to calling, and I know that because of our Christian media, I'll say, and things that are written about or people or churches and ministries, but most churches don't have the context to be like, multiple hundreds or multiple thousands or, that kind of thing. So will you give a comment or two about fulfilling your calling in the place that you're at?
Right. It's a scalability issue.
Okay.
Right?
Talk to us.
For us, we actually, we're a multi-site church, meaning we have multiple locations, and we have, like the broadcast campus, averages 1,500 to 2,000 a weekend. We have other locations that range from 15 to 25.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And we're all part of the same church. We're all significant because of the fishbowl that you're in, the community that you're in. It has to be scalable. So our missiology is that we want to tithe the community. We think that's a huge goal.
Okay.
We would love 10% of the city to be affected by your church. And if you're in a city of 200,000, then you got to be reaching 20,000 people. If you're in a city of 260, you're killing it with 26
people.
And that scalability, because a church of 26 looks at a church of 150, but 150 in a community of 300,000 isn't having nearly the impact that a church is. So, I mean, celebrate that. So I heard this. I was at a conference, big church conference, feeling a little depressed actually, because all these guys with big numbers and big ministries, and we're just this little Kansas church. But the guy on stage who had the biggest church in the room, I don't have permission to throw him under the bus, but I'm not actually going to. I'm going to lift him up. He said, "You all think that I am some kind of special pastor because I have 26,000 people that come to church." He goes, "But if you went across the interstate there to the mall, no one knows my name." He says, "But most of you can't walk down an aisle at your Walmart without having to stop and pray and talk to people because you have significant impact." So we can't use standards you can't use numbers. Matter of fact, when you say I'm in a small church because I only have like 50, 60 people, 90% of churches in America have 50 people or less. You don't have a small church. You have a normal church.
Yeah.
You have the average church. That's not small. That's the average.
Yeah. I'm trying to even think in church history terms, other than of recent, and by recent, let's say the last 100 years even, we didn't have the facilities or the ability to have a church maybe over 200 or 300.
Right.
I mean, I've got books in my library where pastors are being celebrated for having Sunday school of 500. Like that was the mega.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
so thanks for pointing that. Go ahead.
We received a compliment because we built a building in 2014, and it houses 960 on a good. I mean, if you packed it out, if you really pack it out, you can put about 1,000 people in there. And I got a compliment for somebody who said, "Well, congratulations on getting ahead of the culture, knowing that millennials won't even go into it. They don't want to be comfortable in a room beyond 1,000 people now." And I said, "Well, that's not a compliment. That's just where our money ran out. That's why we built this size." But if that's the culture, I mean, literally the big auditoriums, the huge people will do that for a basketball game, but that's because they're there to see a game. They're not there to grow. They're not there for community. The millennials, the adults and the parents of today, the ones that we have to be targeting, they don't want that gargantuan space. They want the relational space.
Well, from a kingdom perspective, it's very interesting to me how growth works. And growth only works, from my perspective, two ways. One thing gets bigger, or you have more things.
Okay.
We have sequoia trees, huge trees, or we have forests. I'm from South Dakota, so I think of Wall Drug. Wall Drug is, I think, 2 complete city blocks. It might be 3 or 4 by now. It's been years since I've been
Big
there.
old thing, yeah.
Would you rather have Wall Drug or Walgreens?
Where they're on every corner.
Where they're every corner in America. And so you've done kind of both.
Yeah.
A little bit. Would you speak to that? Do you mind?
Yeah, we're multi-site. And so when I say multi-site, we finally come to a place where it doesn't mean anything because there's so many different versions of what you have to define what that is.
Good word there.
So
for sure.
We're video-driven rural multi-site. And the reason that we're video-driven is because we can find pastors, but it's hard to find preachers. We can find people who love the community and can administrate and have those gifts, and then we can teach them on the job. But we reproduce the video for the teaching, even though we make them teach on a regular basis, and they usually hate it. But we do that because we're doing with what we can. Now, the reason that we're doing this is because as a multi-site church, you have one of 2 directions that you go. And neither one's wrong. They're just 2 very different things. According to Jim Tomberlin and the Unstuck group, 85%, I think 87% now, of multi-sites don't ever get past 3 locations.
Right. Too complex.
Well, and the ones that get past that generally grow past 5. Of the 15% that are left. And they say it's because the 85, 86, 87% that only have 3, what they're doing is they're finding, how do we do our church better? But the ones that do multiple locations like what we do, they see multi-site as a missiology of church planting, right? Okay. So I will say this, what we do in Kansas, Nebraska, I'm going to tell you, it is not the best way to do church. It's not. If I could independently fund and have a great leader and a great community, awesome. But you can't. You run out of money and you run out of men. And so what do? We're doing what God has given us to do, and we are using a network of churches to make sure that churches in rural places that could not exist if they weren't supported and networked together are there. And we're just pleased as punch to do not what is best, but what can be done.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That is really good. I wish we had the time to unpack even that.
Sure.
It's, not everybody has a John Deere tractor that's a farmer.
That's right.
When I'm in Tanzania, and the people that we're ministering with, they don't even have hose, many of them. They have sticks. But guess what? They're growing their own crops.
They're doing what they can.
They're doing what they can with what they have. So thank you for saying that. That touched my heart.
And issues can come up. People say, well, what are you going to do, Andy, when the culture changes? What are you going to do when video doesn't work anymore? And I kind of tongue in cheek, but also reality. I'm like, it'll stop working in New York and LA. I've got 10 years to figure it out after that. I live in it takes a while for those trends to move in. So I've got a crystal ball in just watching the coast, and we should be okay.
Boy, there's some wisdom, experiential wisdom right there.
That's right.
So one last thing, just if you don't mind, an encouraging word to pastors, no matter where they're at. No, I don't care what size their church is, big, small, just started, or they've been 20 years at a place, 30 years, 40 years. You're such an encourager to pastors. Would you just give us an encouraging word?
Man, I hope that is absolutely the case. And so if I had to just ball it up in a moment here, I would say this. You are doing an important work. And if it doesn't feel like it, if it feels like, listen, I preach just like you, but the difference is I have to take out the trash and run the bulletins and do all that. Listen, I'm just telling you right now, you're doing an important work. We all do peripheral things. There are sometimes that we get to, that God elevates you on a platform that you get to do this, and there's sometimes he humbles you and he asks you to do that. But it doesn't matter. Just know this. If you are preaching the word, and you are loving on people, if you are fulfilling the calling that God has given you, then you are doing important work. And do not listen. If you are hearing a voice that says, this is unimportant, you should be doing better, this is a joke, anything along those lines, that is not coming from the Holy Spirit. So you quit listening to that voice. And you need to drown that voice out with the voice of God and his people and his word. And just know this, what you're doing is significant. And for all eternity, we're going to celebrate the little things that you're doing right now because they are big things in the ripples of the pond of this life. And thank you so much for doing it.
Well, Andy, and thank you too for not only your ministry of today, but your ministry of the past years that has culminated now in helping so many pastors and church leaders. So we're appreciative of that. Thank you for what you've done for us in Iowa. Oh my goodness.
Love
it. You're adopted to Iowa.
We'll take it.
And this is, we're just really honored and so happy to be here. So thanks for inviting us, and thanks for doing this.
Many blessings. Thank you all.